quite a while ago, but still an interesting example about the importance of the decision-making process in aviation. In the chain of finding a good and solid plan to complete this mission with the given circumstances, something went terribly wrong. Threat and Error Management TEM is a famous aviation model these days to spot the threats in order to avoid errors. All started on the 5th of January 2014 when a Bombardier Challenger 601 built in 1994 with a tail number November 115 Whiskey Fox started its journey with its 3 occupants on board in the morning from Toluca, Mexico to Tucson, Arizona, United States before the ongoing flight to Aspen, Colorado was planned. Aspen is famous in any perspective. In one way, the high society loves the place for skiing, vacations, and to enjoy the jet set of winter life. On the other hand, pilots know the place to be one of the most challenging US airports to fly into. The airport, surrounded by a spectacular mountainous scenery located in the Roaring Fork Valley, 7,838 feet above mean sea level, meaning thin air, low aircraft performance and challenging weather phenomena, turbulences, wind shears with steep localizer or visual approaches truly demands everything from the pilots. The runway provides one-way in and out operations only, with some exceptions. What this means is shown on this random radar 24 plot. Aircraft approaching runway 15 while departures from runway 33, so opposite and potentially conflicting, are in progress. This further manifests the fact that beside the visibility, the wind often appears to be the limiting factor, as a runway change is simply not possible. Either for takeoffs or landings, pilots need to take into consideration a certain amount of a tailwind component unless the wind is calm or from the cross side. In-depth preparation and strict adherence to operational procedures is crucial. To have a widely spread experience on the aircraft piloting simply generates more capacity for the environmental challenges. The crew of November 115 Whiskey Fox faced the ugly side of the valley and paid the price for it. The Challenger 601, with a total of 6,750 hours on the airframe, was powered by 2 General Electric CF34 turbofan engines rated at 9,000 pounds of thrust. The last inspection was completed in December 2013. The crew for the trip to Aspen was of a special constellation. 2 Mexican brothers were in charge at that day, Arturo and Emilio Brabata. The pilot in command was Arturo, 52 years of age, with a total of 17,250 hours of flight time experience, a total of 498 hours as a pilot in command, and only 14 hours on the Challenger 601 type model. This includes already the hours from the simulated training. Emilio was the pilot monitoring, sitting on the right side with a total of 20,398 flight time hours, of which 2,219 hours were locked as a pilot in command, with about the same amount of hours on the accident type aircraft like his brother. Both brothers have just completed the Challenger 601 type rating roughly 2 months before the accident flight. The captain passed his check with a satisfactory performance, but struggled, as stated by himself, with the flight management system FMS. Emilio failed his first check ride due to low performances during missed and non-precision approaches, including one engine out procedures. Please note, nowadays non-precision approaches are called 2D approach. However, 5 days later he passed his second check ride. Due to the low experience of both pilots on the Challenger 601, the flight was and had to be conducted on the Part 91 regulations, which is a general aviation flight with lower operational regulation requirements compared to 135, and only for non-revenue paying passengers like aircraft owners or friends. Part 135 requires in any portion of an operation a higher standard. Maintenance, flight time limitations, crew compositions, experience, endurance, everything is more restrictive. The third occupant on board, a Mexican friend of the co-pilot, was basically just a passenger who came along to support the crew for the challenging mission. According to the captain, he was an experienced Challenger 601 pilot sitting on the jump seat during the flight to Aspen. This was not required, but actually a good idea in general, as 14 hours on type just don't make you feel comfortable on a complex jet like the Challenger 601 and a challenging mission like Aspen on top. The Challenger 601 took off from runway 12 and Tucson at 10:04 local time in the morning and headed via a left turn and a northerly track to flight level 360. The flight time is normally around 1 hour and 30 minutes. The en route portion of the flight was uneventful. Whiskey Fox started its descent into Aspen and received radar vectors for the localizer DME Echo approach runway 15. At 11:56, another jet requested to divert to Garfield County Regional Airport due to the prevailing wind and wind shear conditions at Aspen. 11 minutes later, the approach controller requested November Whiskey Fox to verify that they were descending to 13,400 feet, which was the depicted altitude at Point Yargoo, the first point on the approach chart for the localizer approach. Shortly thereafter, ATC cleared the Challenger for the localizer DME Echo approach runway 15 into Aspen.
November 5 Whiskey Fox, verify you have information, Romeo.
We have the Romeo on board.
November 5 Whiskey Fox, thank you. Descend and maintain 13,400.
13,400, November 115 Whiskey Fox.
Yargoo, turn left heading 180, cross Yargoo letter above 13,400, clear localizer DME Echo approach.
Okay, clear to the localizer, DME approach 115 Whiskey Fox.
November 5 Whiskey Fox, cross Yargoo at 13,400 or above, cleared localizer DME Echo approach.
Roger, one localizer Echo approach in 13,400 or above.
At this point, the crew was struggling to make the aircraft descend and set up the FMS for the corresponding approach. The two pilots discussed why the aircraft was not descending. Now the experienced Challenger 601 passenger/pilot jumped in and instructed to activate VNAV mode. From now on, he took influence on a regular basis. The approach controller directed the crew to contact the tower. After a little while, the controller called November Whiskey Fox again to instruct a frequency change, as they have not yet contacted the tower.
5 Whiskey Fox, contact tower.
We'll contact tower 115 Whiskey Fox.
A little later, the crew managed to get in contact with Aspen Tower. Probably they were absorbed and busy setting up and configure the aircraft for the approach and verifying the correct altitudes for the procedure. At 1210 local time, ATC informed the crew about the wind situation at the airport.
Wind 32012, gust 25.
The average wind was from 320 degrees 12 knots gusting 25. This should have caught their attention at this point. Wind from 320 degrees is literally almost a full tailwind component with a steady wind at the edge of the performance envelope. The gust of 25 knots only made it worse. Good airmanship could have ended this approach at this point already in order to divert to the alternate. This, however, was never an option they have considered or discussed from what is available on the cockpit voice recorder. The available weather forecasts like TOF or METAR indicated way ahead of the wind situation even before the takeoff was commenced in Tucson. The weather at the time of the approach was based on the active meter as follows. Wind 310 degrees 9 knots gusting 28 with visibility of 9 miles in haze with few clouds at 3,500, broken at 4,600 and overcast at 5,000. The temperature was reported to be -11 with a QNH of 30.07. Meanwhile, the Challenger was within the final segment of the approach with a steep prescribed 6.59 degrees descent angle, which is twice as steep as a standard instrument approach. ATC has just cleared the flight to land for runway 15 while the discussion in the cockpit about being too high continued.
Runway 15 cleared to land.
Okay, when having the runway clear to land and roll your weather wind.
115 Whiskey Foxtrot, dismiss. X-ray Alpha Victor Alpha Lima, when able turn left, join Alpha contact ground point Niner. Any wind shear?
Affirmative, we have like 20 knots wind shear Victor Alpha Lima.
Gain of 20?
Affirmative, yes.
November 115 Whiskey Foxtrot, Falcon just reported a gain of 20 knots. Use caution for the low level wind shear.
Roger.
The ATC controller informed the crew about a preceding Falcon jet that had speed fluctuations and low-level wind shears during the approach. At 1211, the controller announced the wind to be 310 at 10 knots. The Challenger was at the time at 5 miles final runway 15. The crew struggled to establish the jet on the correct vertical flight path and ended up too high. A moment later, November Whiskey Fox initiated a go-around and followed the published missed approach with a climbing right turn out of the valley up to 16,000 feet.
Okay, missed approach, November 115 Whiskey Fox. There's 33 knots of tailwind.
November 115 Whiskey Foxtrot, execute published miss.
Okay.
Number 5 Whiskey Foxtrot, climb and maintain 16,000, expedite your climb, execute published miss to 16,000 on the miss.
We're executing and climbing to 16,000.
The co-pilot reported a tailwind of 33 knots during the approach. Now something happened in the cockpit which is hard to set in relation to any aviation safety model. After contacting approach control, the ATC controller launched a question towards the crew about their intentions. The passenger told the crew to return back for another approach. None of the two pilots in charge were questioning this input despite the fact that the passenger just took command over the aircraft.
Archer, November 115 Whiskey Fox, level at 16, climbing to 16,000.
Sure, 115 Whiskey Foxtrot, Aspen, departure, roger, same intentions.
Okay, to return back and to another approach. We had a tailwind of 30 knots.
November 5 Whiskey Foxtrot, roger, fly heading 310, vector localizer, GME Echo approach.
310, and the vectors again for the localizer, 155.
Crew Resource Management (CRM) should exactly avoid such a behavior. 37,600 hours of flight time experience in total on the left and right seat, including flight experience on Airbus, were not enough to see the risk of giving the go for a second approach. Gut feeling should have rung the bell. All the warning signals from the first attempt did not convince them to pick the safe path and head for an alternate. The decision making within this specific situation had nothing to do with the lack of experience on the aircraft type itself. Target fascination is a deceptive hazard in aviation. The two brothers prepared the jet for another approach. Needless to say that the preparation for the second approach ended up similar to the first one. At around 12:13 local time, the crew and the passenger began to set up the FMS for another approach. For the next 4.5 minutes, they were busy with the flight management system. 3 minutes later, November Whiskey Fox received a radar heading of 120 to cross Yarragu at 13,000 feet and the clearance for the localizer DME Echo approach for runway 15. The passenger kept instructing the crew through the approach, aircraft configurations, altitude and airspeed guidance for descent. Meanwhile, the wind had picked up, showing 330 degrees with 16 knots gusting 25. The Challenger 601 has a maximum acceptable tailwind component for takeoffs and landings of 10 knots. The prevailing conditions were out of performance envelopes. The captain mentioned at this stage that the tailwind component had reached 26 knots, but was positive that it would weaken once through the mountains. The passenger said, "Don't worry," and continued with his instructions. November Whiskey Fox received the landing clearance for runway 15, but the jet was yet far away from being established in any sense.
5 Whiskey Foxtrot, wind 330 at 16, runway 15, cleared to land. 1 minute average 32014, gust 25.
Roger, 115 Whiskey Fox.
They were struggling with the centerline, speed and altitude. The ground proximity warning system activated to warn the crew about the sink rate several times. The tailwind had increased to 39 knots. Erratic power changes accompanied the last seconds of flight November Whiskey Fox. The passenger stated, "As we get lower, I'll take out the flight spoilers for you." The Challenger was now at 100 feet above the ground when the captain used expletives and stated, "The winds are screwed." The passenger instructed the flight crew to lower the spoilers, what the copilot rejected. The chaotic last seconds ended with a 3G runway strike accompanied by a stall warning and a flight spoiler or takeoff configuration warning. The tower controller said, "Go around, go around, go around." A split of a second later, the Challenger impacted a second and last time on runway 15. A CCT camera captured the first strike and the final impact. The aircraft burned and came to rest upside down on the west side of runway 15 between Alpha 6 and Alpha 5. Co-pilot Emilio Probata died upon impact. The captain and the passenger were injured. Contributing factors which led to this accident were the poor decision-making about landing with a tailwind in exceedance of the aircraft's performance envelope and ignoring SOPs to initiate a go-around when becoming unstabilized during the approach. The accident is classified as loss of control in flight with a perfectly running aircraft. It's easy for me to sit here with the hard facts and a cup of coffee on the table studying the details with no existing pressure and to spot the mistakes done by the crew. The real gain behind this though is the learning effect, which is and should always be the prime benefit when analyzing such accidents. Rest in peace, Emilio, and condolences to his family and friends.